Good afternoon, everyone. You can hear me, see me, all that, right? See my slides properly.
Good afternoon, sir. Yes, we can.
Yeah, I had another lecture. It took a little bit of time. So let's start right away. And we'll catch up that 7 minutes at the end. Yeah, so we were basically discussing about interest rate risk last time, right? We were basically talking about duration, interest rate swaps, and net interest margin and things like that. Now, let's basically focus on exchange rate risk. Now, I'll start with a small example. Yeah, I have given you an example here. The value of LKR, I mean, this slide is pretty old. The value of 203 million in US dollars when exchange rate was $203 million was 1 million. When the exchange rate is 375, the value of 203 million rupees is 541 US dollars. Now, what does this mean? Let's open a Excel sheet. Okay. Let's say I have $100,000. Okay. A year ago, this $500,000, what would have been the dollar rupee rate a year ago?
Say 330.
330. So my 500,000 would have been worth so much LKR. So happily, I was basically holding on to it, saying, I'm $500,000 in my worth. Today it is
Around 290, no?
around 290. So versus today, what has happened to me? I've lost 20 million rupees in LKR. This is FX risk. Fundamentally, the price risk of Forex. So this is the FX risk in FX price risk. Okay. Similarly, now we'll go back to our presentation. Banks, right? Banks also basically face this risk in a similar manner. That 500,000 is called a position in a bank, right? And if you hold on to any position, any forex position, foreign currency position, then a bank is exposed to foreign currency risk, which is the price risk. How do you explain that? If you go back to our spreadsheet, forget about these things. This was my previous. Yeah. So say I had a position, or I have a cash balance of US dollars 1 million in my book. Every end of day, I need to value this US dollar position into rupees. So yesterday, my closing rate was say 310. So my $1 million in LKR term is 310 million rupees, right? So today when I start, I had $1 million. Okay. I didn't do any transaction, let's say, throughout the day. I just sat on that $1 million. Today, when the day was closing, due to market whatever changes, exchange rate ended up at 300. I didn't do any transaction, but I ended up with a loss of 10 million rupees. Do you understand? So having an position in any other currency other than rupee has basically given me a loss in this case because of the currency volatility in the adverse direction, not in my favor. But if this went to 325, let's say, then I would have ended up with a profit of 15 million. So this possibility of either making profits or losses due to this price volatility is called effect price risk. Understood? So in your personal life also, if you are doing valuation of your, usually we don't do that. Like I have an NRFC balance of, let's say, $25,000. I'm happy with it. I have $25,000. But if you are marking it to market on a daily basis, now this is what has happened here. You will realize that in rupee terms, whether it's you made a profit or a loss. Okay. Any questions? Now, if I didn't have this, so how do I basically, that's a question now. How do I minimize risk? Managing exchange rate risk. How do I? Now, I was basically maintaining a balance of 1 million and therefore I was exposed to either a 15 million profit or 10 million loss depending on where the currency movement happened. right? If I don't want to get this million loss, what should I do? Let's say 10 million, say the tolerance limit I have is $8 million. Oh, sorry, 8 million rupees. If that is the case, what should I do? Or if I don't want to get exposed to this 10 million loss, you can see the screen, right? You can see the,
Yes, sir. We can see the Excel sheet.
yeah. So my question is, if you are not happy with getting this 10 million loss, what are the things that you can do? I will add to it by saying, what you don't want is to go to 10 million loss. Anything less than 8 million, you are okay. So what are the few things that you can do about it? Hmm? Forward rate transactions and do what? Buy or sell. Yeah. So selling means what? Reducing this position, right? So either it could be forward sell or even spot sell. Doesn't matter. So if you basically bring it down to 750, what happens? Sorry, 750,000 rupees. Now you have come down to 7.5 million rupees of loss. Right? So one way of now you are within the tolerance limit because your tolerance was 8. Anything less than 8 million, you were okay. Right? So if you have, let's say, 800,000 here, then you are within that limit. So one thing that you can do is reduce your exposure from 1 million to 800,000 and you will be within this, your tolerance limit. So establishing a tolerance limit and staying with it. That is reducing your risk. Or you can basically have no limit, no exposure, no profit, no gain, no profit, no loss. Currency moves any which way they want. I will not have a P&L. Right? So these are a few things that you can basically have to manage your price risk, FX price risk. You basically have a smaller exposure or no exposure. So no exposure is you have a squared position. When you have a squared position only, you will have a zero risk, right? The moment you have even a $1 position, you will have the price risk. But to manage it, you can basically establish this loss limit. This is what we did. I said, we are okay to lose about 8 million, not 10 million. So therefore, I reduce my exposure. However, there is a situation there. What is that situation? Going back to this. Now that 800 came about because of this movement was only 10 rupees. What if movement went to 290? And I would have gone to 16 million loss back again, right? If my loss limit remains at 8, then what should I do here? If I bring it to if I bring my position down to 4 million, then I'm back in, right? So I could have opened with whatever million, but I have established the 8 million loss limit depending on where the currency settles. I have to keep changing my open position. I have to reduce my open position if I'm making a bigger loss. So the more I lose here because the movement is adverse, then I have to go down, selling my dollar position to be within this limit. Right? This is not exactly the way I'm doing it, right? But this is the best how I can explain it to you. Right? So the more the volatility here, I have to reduce my open exposure here to be within my loss limit of 8 million. So that is one way of managing my FX price risk. The other way is basically have a squared position or zero position. But zero position is not the ideal. No, I mean, then we don't have to be in FX markets or whatever. We are talking FX markets. So then the other way is this. Or else you can have FX options and things like that. If price moves this way, then so many other transactions happen that negate that adverse price impact and things like that. So those are the most sophisticated derivative transactions that you can enter into to manage your FX risk. Okay. So this is what I'm saying here. The only possibility is to be squared, or else you have certain limits that you basically establish. And those are tolerable limits. 8 million rupees is a tolerable limit that my institution can absorb. Right? If that is so, once you establish that tolerance limit, you need to change the exposure or the open position that I have to be within that tolerable limit. So as long as I'm within the tolerable limit, I'm okay. That's what you call managing loss limits, or rather managing by establishing loss limits. Okay. If you want to basically ask any questions, you ask me, then I can explain it to you the way you would understand. Because now I have explained it the way I understand. Right? So that is managing price risk. Then the other thing is liquidity risk. Forex has liquidity risk also. I mean, we discussed it in fixed income also in trading. Some instruments have higher liquidity than the others, right? Here also we have that liquidity risk. Liquidity risk is inability to either purchase or dispose an asset without making a substantial delta in value. That is what you call liquidity risk. Now, what is it in simple terms? Say you have a short position of Let's go to our spreadsheet. Let's say I have basically sold $1 million to somebody at 300 and what is it? $325. So I have sold $1 million at 325 rupees, right? And so when
Excuse me, sir, the screen is on PowerPoint still, I think.
okay, hold on. Thank you. Okay, right?
Yes, sir. Now, okay.
Right? I have basically, let's say, sold. This is a sell. $1 million at 325. Now, I have created a negative position here because it's a sell. For me to basically be squared, I need to buy back that $1 million. If the market was very liquid, now at that time, let's say when I sold, the market was at 320. No, 315, let's say. So there was a 10-cent margin with which I have sold this. When I basically want to buy that back from the market, so this is a customer transaction, let's say. I want to buy it back, I go to interbank, right? To buy this 1 million. The market is very liquid, right? So therefore, I'm able to buy it at 315 itself. Then I sold at 325 and got so much. Then I squared the position and then I had to ink so much of cost. So therefore, my profit is 10 million. Do you follow me? Right?
Yes.
Now the market, let's say this was because the market was liquid. If the market is illiquid, will I be able to buy it at 315 itself? If the market is illiquid, there are no dollars in the market, interbank market. 315 was the first quote. So I might be able to, collect a little bit at 315. That is not sufficient, right? So let's say I basically collected my $1 million in this fashion. $250,000 at 315. Another $250,000. If the market is illiquid, what would happen to the 315?
It'll go up.
It'll go up. It became so. Another 250,000 at 325. Easy. And final 250,000 at 330. What would have happened to my $1 million now? What is my cost? The average of this, right? So my purchase price is now 200 and 322 and 50 cents. What has happened to my profit? Gone down to 2,500,000. What if this average price went to 330? I would have incurred a loss of 5 million. Why is this happening? Because the market is
Illiquid.
Right? So this is what liquidity risk is all about. Right? Your intent of profit has got converted to a loss because now you are unable to source your dollars in the market because the market is illiquid. So that is liquidity risk. So what has happened? Inability to either purchase or dispose an asset without making a substantial delta. That delta is the price movement that happened. Right? So this is all what I explained. We are currently entering between liquid risk and exchange rate risk, shortage of liquidity leading to high exchange rate volatility. So because of shortage, there is price volatility. So there are two things that are happening here. Liquidity risk, and due to liquidity risk, you have price risk that has come in. Okay. Now, this thing can basically have in balance sheets also. Liquidity risk. Liquidity in terms of balance sheet. If you don't have sufficient liability in balance sheets or sufficient liquid assets in your balance sheet, right? Now, looking at a banking perspective, like even from a company's perspective, if you look at a company's balance sheet, you have payables on the one side, you have receivables on the other side, right? If your payables are very short term, they are basically you need to pay in next week, within next week. But your receivables are coming in 3 months or 6 months time. Will you be able to set off your receivables against your payables?
No, there will be a maturity mismatch.
Maturity mismatch. So that maturity mismatch is arising due to what? Or rather, put it differently, what do you call that maturity mismatch here? It basically manifests a illiquid balance sheet, right?
Yes, yes.
So that there is a risk of you not being able to settle your payables, right?
Yes.
So same way in a bank balance sheet also, if you have long-term assets, loans are all long-term. Your deposits are all short-term. When the deposits mature, there is a possibility that depositors will take the deposits away without reinvesting. Now, if that happens, your loans are too long for you to get the settlement. Then also your balance sheet has a maturity mismatch, which is basically leading to a liquidity situation because of an illiquid balance sheet, right?
Yes.
So in Forex, also we have liquidity risk. In normal balance sheets also we have liquidity risk. So this is what liquidity risk is all about. So to manage this liquidity risk, what we need to do is, when you are running these positions, you have to match the positions and run. Like in the FX situation, if there is an illiquid situation, you have to keep a reasonable margin to compensate for the illiquidity price volatility, illiquidity based price volatility. So instead of selling at 325, had I basically sold at 335 when the market was 315, I have 5 million profit, right? You need to keep illiquidity margin there. That's managing the FX risk. So in a FX situation, because of this illiquidity, if there is a price volatility coming in, or even for any matter, there is a huge volatility in price, you need to increase the margin to ensure that you are within the positive territory. Now you understand why when there is a market crunch, why banks quote very high rates for your FX, right? Because they are covering their illiquidity risk. So that's what is expected out of this discussion, to basically bring it back to your day-to-day activity and understand why certain things are happening in a particular way.
So this small question, sir.
Yes.
Now this liquidity levels in forex markets, like is it like how dynamic is it? It's intraday. It'll have high volatilities, is it?
Yeah. In countries like banana republics like ours, yes, we do.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
in order to basically manage this liquidity risk, now I talked about balance sheet liquidity also. Like in the banks, if you want to basically have liquidity, I said when we have short-term deposits only, we face that problem of not having sufficient liquidity. So if you have long-term liabilities or long-term deposits, the maturities will not come in a short cycle. Such balance sheets are highly liquid. And that's when you see certain banks give some preferential interest rates for long-term deposits. Have you seen that happening from time to time?
And
That is
collecting
because,
minor deposits also.
yeah, they want to basically make their balance sheets liquid. That's why. On the other side, you can also have sufficient liquid assets that you can sell down without basically making an impairment, in the sense impairment in price. Then also, you can generate the required liquidity to offset those outgoing liabilities by selling the liquid assets. Right? So that's another way of managing liquidity, having sufficient liquid assets or having sufficient long-term liabilities. Or you can have contingent facilities arranged. If I face a liquidity situation, I can go to somebody. That also is one way of managing liquidity risk. So that's the second risk. In terms of Forex, how do you manage this? By having small limits. If there is a liquidity situation in the market, Forex liquidity, you don't go and expose yourself into large transactions unless you are able to source those large transactions in the market. And that is also the reason why during the FX liquidity crunch we faced a couple of years back, banks would have said, if you went to a bank with a $5 million LC, they would say, okay, I'll take few days to collect the dollars and then quote you, because they were collecting little by little, because little by little were the ones that were available in the market. They would collect, average it out, and quote a price to you. So these are ways of managing those risks.
So ideally, in a illiquid market, the forex positions, the exposures, the banks would limit their forex positions. Is it, sir?
Yeah.
Right.
Then another risk that is there is counterparty risk. Counterparty risk is, as you can see, if I go back to my Excel sheet, see, in all these cases, now here, customers sell. To the customer, I sell $1 million and customer sends me 335 million rupees. Here, I buy from a bank $1 million and I send to the bank 330 million rupees. Right? Now, in these cases, this is the counterparty. Counterparty also has to do an action. Counterpart also has to do an action here. What is that action? When I sell to the customer has to give me 335 million rupees. When I give, now here the counterpart is this chap. Because here I give 330 million rupees, I have to get $1 million from the counterpart. You understand?
Yes.
Here the counterpart is this guy who is going to give me the $1 million. Here the counterpart is the customer who's going to give me the $325 million, 35 million. Now, what if I basically do this? I sell dollars. The counterparty doesn't give me. Now, it doesn't happen that much in customer transactions because when customer wants to buy $1 million from me, customer usually funds his rupee account well in advance, 335. So this situation doesn't arise that much. But this is interbank transaction. I send my dollars to the rupees to the counterpart. And the counterpart doesn't send me the dollars. Then what happens? I'll be short, right? So any FX transaction or even any borrowing lending transaction also, there is a counterparty risk that I honor my transaction, but the other party doesn't honor their transaction. How do you manage this risk? So this is basically a credit risk on the counterparty, right? And all the factors that credit risk is faced with apply here for counterparty risk. So then we have to credit evaluate our counterparty before taking these kind of exposures, right? And credit evaluate the counterparty and establish limits with the counterparty, right? After even establishing limits, the counterparty may default, but then that default should get basically identified. That defaulting probability should be identified at the time of evaluating his credit. So at the time when you are evaluating his credit, he was very credit worthy, because credit risk evaluation is a skill by itself, right? So then once you evaluate the credit risk and establish limits saying this customer or this counterparty is good for this amount, then usually if the credit evaluation was correct, then the probability of him defaulting on that value, particular limit, is rather low. So establishing counterparty exposure limits is the best way we can basically avoid. That means when the credit evaluation happens and the credit team basically decides this counterparty is good for $1 million, but not for $2 million, you will stay within $1 million. Because what they are saying is, if you give $2 million, he might not be able to repay the entire thing in one go. But if you give him $1 million, he will. That's his balance sheet structure and business structure and creditworthiness and all that. Right? So that's how you manage that risk.
That's why the interbank borrowing limits are different from bank to bank. No, sir.
Yes. Exactly. You have what you call settlement risk or FX. Then you have pre-settlement risk. So let me go back to, so settlement risk exists when what I told you, I settle, but he doesn't settle. I settle my obligation, but he doesn't settle his obligation. That is actually settlement risk. For that, you need to basically establish settlement risk limits, right? But the best way to reduce settlement risk is when there is a third party net settlement situation. That like a clearinghouse or central depository kind of structure, where if I have to give 1 million and other party has to give me 330 million, the settlement will happen only when this third party sees funds coming in both the sides. When he sees, so this is what happens in central clearing. in central bank, there is a process called central clearing system. Now, central clearing happens only when central bank sees as a third party, he has to see funds coming from both the sides for this transaction to get executed. Then they do a matching process and then push the funds in either direction. So it happens through systems and various things. Clearing system, we call it. That's what it is, right? And then an advanced method is a net settlement system, right? All your liabilities, all your payables and receivables are netted out against each counterparty, and the net amount is the one which is settled. That also can happen. So when you have that kind of an independent third party looking at all these receivables and payables and settle what is available, the settlement risk can be reduced. Because if the other party has not paid, then what you have paid doesn't go through. It fails. Okay. So then the third party returns the money back to you saying that it does not return settled. So you are not exposed. Or then you can have a situation like delivery versus payment, or DVP, RVP, receipt versus payment. That means I will pay only when I see the other party honoring. It happens in share market, DVP, RVP kind of situation. Bond markets, it happens, right? Once you see the bond only, payment will happen. Once you see the shares only, settlement money will go through. They won't go simultaneously, right? The third way of managing it is having a settlement risk limit. Again, what we basically discussed. What is the counterparty good for? Is he good for $1 million or $10 million? If he's good for only $1 million, you don't basically do a transaction where he has to settle $10 million because he is sure to fail. So then you establish only a 1 million settlement risk limit. Then there is a concept of pre-settlement risk. What is pre-settlement risk? Now for that, I will basically go to the Excel sheet. Now say you basically enter into a forward FX transaction. So this is trade day. Let's say 4th May. You basically agree to sell $1 million. And this is sell side. Right. Sell, or I also basically will put the word pay. This is buy, receive. Let's say this is the rate at which we have transacted, rate, exchange rate. On the 4th, I sell, and the agreed rate is, let's say, 295, forward effect, let's say $310 to the dollar. This is a transaction. But it basically settles on the, let's say, of June. right? So on 4th of June, what happens is $1 million will go from me, right? And I will receive 310 million rupees. Okay. So this is the transaction. Now, settlement risk, because on the 4th of June, when I send my $1 million, I don't get my 310, right? Now, in a pre-settlement risk situation, it's slightly different. Once I entered into this transaction, I enter into this transaction because I have to manage my position and I may have a buy transaction happening somewhere. To offset that buy transaction only, I will basically do this sell transaction. Right? So I would have bought dollars, right? Let's say in this situation, a customer, export customer came and sold me forward dollars. Value for June, right? And let's say I bought it at 295. Or yeah, 295. So I spent only this much. I sold it at 310. So I would have ended up in this transaction with a profit of what?
15 million.
Okay. Now, so based on this transaction only, I have made that 15 million, right? See, this export customer is quite, trustworthy. But between May 4th and June 4th, this counterparty, Bank X, let's say, goes bankrupt, right? So let's say June 1st, this guy goes bankrupt. Now he is no more. Will this transaction of mine happen?
You won't be getting paid.
I won't get paid. So therefore, I will not settle myself also. Am I right?
Yes.
Because I would have settled my 310 on the 4th June. But 1st June itself, I know that this guy has gone bankrupt. So therefore, I will not settle my 310. Correct?
Yes.
Now, do I have an exposure here? Do I have a risk now to my P&L?
Yes, because this customer's transaction will be happening, right? Irrespective of what happened to the bank X.
Exactly. Now, I have to find another counterparty to sell this $1 million to do this transaction. Right? So by
Yes.
that time, if the rates have basically advanced to 290, let's say, like today, then what happens? My new transaction on for June will happen at what rate? 290.
9.
Now what happens?
Profit gets reduced.
No, I incur a loss.
Yes, yes. We'll have to pay 295.
Yeah. This is what I get. This is what I have to sell to the customer. My profit situation, which I thought was a profit on May 4th, by June 4th, has gone into a loss now. Because of what? Because this guy didn't settle. But he didn't settle during his settlement period. So because of that, prior to the settlement date, so therefore, I didn't incur a loss of 310 million, but I ended up losing $5 million. Okay, so this is what pre-settlement risk is all about. So when you are dealing in forwards markets, now here it's a forwards market. Transaction happened on 4th May to settle on 4th June. It could have happened anytime between 4th May and 4th June. So that risk is called pre-settlement risk. Understood?
Yes, sir.
You are a banker, you understand. How about the others? They are very silent. I don't know whether they understand or not.
A small questions on this same topic itself.
Yeah.
This counterparty risk and settlement risk, what is the difference? What I feel is like it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, it is the same thing. Counterparty risk actually happens when you lend. When you lend, it's called counterparty risk. Because-
Right, right.
But it's the same. That's why I said settlement risk is credit risk. Counterparty risk is also credit risk. So settlement risk happens when you have to exchange cash flows. You pay me and I pay you. But in a counterparty pure risk, I lend to you, you have to perform. It's a performance risk.
So basically, counterparty risk would apply when there are like established limits within the banks, and settlement risk is somewhat over the counter transactions. Is it?
Settlement risk happens on FX mostly.
Okay.
I settle, he doesn't settle. But his non-settlement is a counterparty risk actually. But since there are two different cash flows, we differentiate and say it's a settlement risk issue. But once I give you money as a lender and you as a borrower, I'm basically dependent on you to perform. So I'm dependent on the counterparty to perform. So that also is counterparty. See, these words can get interchanged, but concept is the same.
Okay, sir. Thanks.
So I really don't know whether the others have understood what I have been talking about. If you ask me questions, at least tell me I don't understand anything, then I could have basically approached it differently. I keep saying this mantra every day. Pre-settlement risk, managing pre-settlement risk is controlling the forward is one thing, right? Based on the credit, this thing. Diversifying counterparties. So if the person is not good for 1 month, then you deal with up to 1 week. So you shorten the duration of your exposure, the risk reduces. That's a concept of risk, right?
Yes.
The longer the exposure, higher the risk. Because longer the period, the possibility or probability of something going wrong is greater. That's why when exposures are long term, the risk is higher. So to reduce risk, you basically shorten the period.
The time premiums.
Yes. That's the concept. Then another risk is concentration risk. Now, concentration risk is now if all your eggs are in one basket, when the basket falls, all the eggs are broken. But if you had 10 eggs in 10 different baskets and only one dropped, you lose only one egg. That's the concentration risk. So when you lend also, you have single borrower limits, maximum lending limits, and so on and so forth, which basically makes sure that you don't lend or you don't have a large exposure to one counterparty. Because if that counterparty fails, you have a large loss. Instead, you have lending limits based on their creditworthiness, of course, and diversify as much as possible. Right? When you diversify, your counterparty risk gets reduced, your concentration risk gets reduced. So concentration could be based on counterparties. It could also be through tenors. Say, if you have a person, I lend to you. You have cash inflows coming in at different times. Say, spread over a 1 year period. But I lend you everything to be maturing on one particular day. Then what happens? On that particular day, you may not be able to pay, but if I spread that over a longer period of time, you would have been able to pay. What is the classic example? I mean, I'm not talking nonsense. I'll show you that. What happened to Sri Lanka was something like that. We defaulted on our debt because debt got piled up within a very short period. Within a period of 1 year, we had to pay back a large amount, which we couldn't source. But if that large amount was spread over a longer period, we would have been able to generate our cash over a long period and settle that. So that concentration into one small window basically made us default, right? Because we were not basically looking at these risks. This is what I want to basically, emphasize on. This is not necessarily a very technical, boring risk management discussion, but what the problem that we went into was our people, that is you and I, also didn't understand risk properly. We as a nation, we don't have that appreciation for risk. We are punters. That's why we spend so much on credit card. We want to live a life on credit. We don't think how we are going to pay. So when payment comes due, you are in deep distress. I mean, I'm not talking about you as an audience, but people in general, look at them. Do they live within their means? How many of Sri Lankans you think live within their means? I don't think we have done a research on that, but credit card balances show you that. What does credit cards in a way show? I mean, a chap like me, I don't roll over my credit. I mean, I've been a banker, so I should be shocked if I lived like that. You know, I never roll over my credit card dues. I use my credit card only as a cash flow instrument. I invest my money to mature a day before the cash credit card bill is due, and I know exactly how much I can. So, depending on how much I invest, I control my spending, right? Why do I do that? If I basically pay on every day, I won't be able to get that interest income. So, I use the credit card and I pay on the due date with zero interest, but on the investment, I make interest income. Do you at least understand what I'm saying here? Others?
Yes, sir.
Because if you overspend on the day that you have to pay the credit card, that is the concentration. Everything has to be settled on the date you have to pay the credit card bill. You can't spend or settle the credit card bill over 1 month or 6 months, right? On the due date, you have to pay. If you don't pay, you have to pay a penalty. Now, paying a penalty is the risk. And that risk is coming because of concentration. You don't have enough cash coming in, your salary is not enough to pay the credit card bill on the due date. Your income is concentrated onto one day. Your expenditure or spend or payment is concentrated onto one day, and these two don't match. Concentration risk. Have you thought about it that way? So this whole discussion today is meant for you all, at least on your personal selves, to think in those terms. Not necessarily to ask questions at the exam and fail you or whatever. It's a life skill that you need to basically inculcate in you. Risk management is that, right? Yeah. Yeah, of course. That's the model. If everybody settles on day zero,
They won't get any interest income, no?
exactly. I mean, I'm giving you industry secrets. Yes, exactly. And that is why there are so many offers and things like that. See, there is a different side to it also. See, there are payment schemes. Then there is a commission attached to it. So credit card business, if you take credit card business, because I don't have cash, I have a plus, I have the buying power. So when I have the buying power, what it means is I have buying power throughout the month. Otherwise, I will have buying power only on the day I get my salary check, or 2-3 days after the salary check. But the credit card has given me or empowered me to buy throughout the month. Now, that empowerment basically allows businesses to sell their goods throughout, right? So therefore their sales enhance as a result. Because if I were empowered to buy, or if I had the buying power only during the paycheck few days, sometimes I wouldn't have gone to some clothing store and bought some extra shirt or whatever. Right? By the time I get my payment or salary, that need of mine would have basically gone away. Right? So I wouldn't have gone and bought that shirt. Instead, I would have had to settle certain other things. But since I have this credit card, which basically gives me that buying power, when that need comes to me or that urge comes to me, I go and buy the shirt as well. So that gives, so these credit cards is not evil. It basically activates consumerism. Consumerism runs economies, right? So there is a huge contribution. But we need to make sure that we are disciplined and that we don't basically get caught on the concentration risk or mismatch risk. All right. So this is why I'm basically trying to, give this risk management piece in international finance, because this has nothing to do with international finance per se. But we as a country got into this whole bloody mess also because of international finance risk not managed properly. We didn't understand what the hell was going on. We thought we can borrow and pay whenever we want, kind of. When in normal language we say it hits the fan, you know what happens. And that is what happened to Sri Lanka. Right? And people, you and I, we were very happy when they were borrowing and basically giving us all the foreign goodies. We gave them 2/3. We gave them, I don't know what. Because people did not understand the risk that we were exposing ourselves to. So if you want to know my voting base, I didn't vote them because I knew that we are basically going to get hammered on this carnival time. That is because I understood risk. And you know how many didn't understand risk in Sri Lanka, right? Because we thought everything was tickety-boo. It's a carnival time. Let's enjoy. So we were enjoying our foreign trips. We were enjoying our foreign vehicles, foreign goods, all on borrowed money. Concentration risk, currency mismatch risk, FX risk. All that is there in this whole saga that we have gone through. We borrowed short term for long term projects, liquidity risk. Before the project ends, we have to basically start paying the loans. The project, whether it was giving revenue or not, that's a secondary matter, right? But even before the project ended, we had to start paying. So we borrowed more, thinking, okay. See, actually what happened was during that 15, 17, 18 period, we borrowed to extend our payment period. But unfortunately, what happened was we borrowed and borrowed at low cost also. But unfortunately, that those borrowings were used for consumption. Who uses that? The parliament. And we basically sit pretty and say, okay, fine. Right? If people understood risk, if majority of people understood risk, we wouldn't have fallen into this. Right? So when you have to use your, voting power also, you need to basically look at this risk. Because this country's risk management is done by these fellows. And you need to think according to your understanding whether it is done properly. So that's why I say more than asking questions at an exam, this little piece is very important for your day to day and your existence in this country. Because we have gotten to this mess because of we did not go by the risk management principles. Right? So that's why I say, so we'll look at those things again once I finish this. So risk exists everywhere. I mean, we can't basically say there is no risk. So once I conclude this, we'll go back to what went wrong, what goes wrong in our lives, and show you how we can manage those. So, I mean, when I start my vehicle to go to Kandy, I don't know whether there will be some errand driver who will come and basically hit me. I can't control that. Right? That cannot be eliminated. What do I do then? What do I do?
Accept that risk.
Accept that risk and do what? I try to minimize that risk. How do I minimize that risk?
By driving carefully.
By driving carefully, going at, not at high speeds. When there are, bends around, you manage. You look at these, lunatic bus drivers and all, when they come onto your side, you don't challenge those fellows. You try to take your vehicle off the road. Right? So those are what? Those are mitigating those risks. Then you don't necessarily drive at, very ungodly hours when, the counterparty drivers can basically fall asleep. That is counterparty risk we are talking about. Right? I mean, if you really look at these things exist in our lives, right? But we don't think in those terms and we fall into trouble as a result. Right? That's why I say risks exist everywhere, not only in financial markets, but in general economic activity too. It cannot be avoided, but it can be mitigated and managed. So without us realizing, we take certain steps. That is risk management. Risk management in our day-to-day lives, right? We avoid going through, bad areas during ungodly hours. That's risk management, right? So similarly, if you look at extended to financial risk, you avoid going through ungodly places. You basically stick to your safe passage in financial transactions also. Right? That's what you need to do. So most people link risk to financial markets, but look around. Weather has a risk. Health has a risk. Traveling has a risk. Employment has a risk. Business, agriculture, people. We all have risks, but it's basically managing. Right? Insurance is a risk mitigation tool. So financial derivatives are mitigating tools, but again, we mismanaged it. Derivatives were used for various other purposes to make money out of them rather than manage risk. And then we got shocked by that because when you try to make money out of derivatives, you lose money. There's a possibility of losing money, and we ended up at the wrong end, lost money. And derivatives basically had a natural death. No derivatives thereafter in this market because we used it in the wrong way. Again, whose fault? Our fault. We didn't understand what it is used for because of lack of understanding. Lack of understanding of risk management. This is why I keep saying these things because I'm in a way I'm frustrated because I don't know whether I shared this with you. I left this country, went to a different market, worked there for about 10 years. And when I came back, this market had not changed an inch. It had actually gone back. I'm talking capital markets. The only thing that was available was when I left, the yield curve was short When I came back, the yield curve was long. What does that mean? When I went, government was borrowing only up to short-term treasury bills. When I came back after 10 years, yield curve was in 30 years, 40 years. So we've been borrowing across the entire length of the yield curve. That's the only thing that that had changed. Other than that, nothing. So it frustrates me because those markets where I worked had gone through heaps and bounds. Right? So
Have we
the
dealt with
problem,
the derivatives, sir, in Sri Lankan markets?
sorry,
Have we dealt with the derivatives in Sri Lankan markets?
we had derivatives, right? Oil hedging was a derivative,
CPC.
which killed the whole market.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are, like, you have interest rate swaps and, currency swaps and things like that that happen in the market, but mostly done by the foreign banks to foreign counterparts like the Unilevers of this world or British American Tobacco or, Lodestar
HSBC
or,
and SCB just happened.
yeah. So there are a few derivatives that happen, but mostly with foreign companies that are operating in Sri Lanka because they have to manage the risk. And those things are underwritten mostly by the foreign banks in the country. But we should have been basically, the entire local market should have basically got exposed to that. But we are not, right? The concept is if there is no risk, there is no return. But you need to basically manage the risk so that your return is safeguarded, right? So this is why I keep saying the general public has to be aware of, now going back to what happened with our exposure. We borrowed short-term dollars. We spent long-term, mostly in rupees. We also spent substantial amount short-term in rupees. What were these two? I want you to think and answer me so that when you think, you will think hard. At least something will basically get absorbed into you. Now, I gave you a situation. We borrowed dollars. We borrowed dollars short term. We spent part of it long term rupees and dollars, of course. Part of it kind of rupees short term. What were those? Spend side. Explain to me where exchange rate risk is there, where liquidity rate risk is there, where concentration risk is, and where cash flow risk is. Let's basically go through that as a exercise. I will basically open a spreadsheet on this. Think through. Can you tell me? ISB borrowing. What were the tenors of the borrowings? For how long were the borrowings? 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, multiple choice. What were the borrowings for? Make a guess. Is it absolutely boring to you all? You don't like to answer questions, or what's a? I can't understand what I want to. See, as adults, I don't want to call names. We're calling names is a grade 10 affair. You are a master students. Tarindo.
Yes, sir.
You are the one. No.
What did I do, sir?
No. You always answer, so I need to basically go to someone else. Ravindu. ISB. Huh? What is the tenor of ISB borrowings? Average tenor. Five years. 5 to 7 years. Okay. Right. Then, who is number 15? Or let's say Chamari. What were they used for? ISBs. In your knowledge. Tell me. Chamari? අපි අර ගත්ත ඩොලර්ස් මොනවටද වීදම් කරේ? ඔයා හිතන විදිහට. මොනවද අපි හැදුවේ ලංකාවේ? I'll make a note of Chamari. Okay. You don't talk, then I'll have to make a note of you guys. 32 නේද? ගණනි. What did we use these monies for? ISBs කියන්නේ අපේ sovereign bonds කියලා අපි කියන්නේ. Sorry? Yeah, tell me. I didn't hear you.
Sir, I don't know, sir.
You don't know. Okay. Who knows?
It's an assumption, sir. I think they used to repay the loans and interest using those money.
Okay, loans and interest, one. Good. What
Development
else?
purposes.
What kind of development? Loans, development,
Yeah.
Infrastructure, sir.
infrastructure. Right.
Yeah. Basically the highways.
Right, good. So, let's say loans, recurrent expenditure. හරිද? ඒකේ වචනේ recurrent expenditure. පුනරාවර්තන. Good. Loans, recurrent expenditure. පුනරාවර්තන වීදම් කියන්නේ මොන වගේ දේවල්ද? Salaries. හරි ඒ වගේ. So එතන දාමු අපි salaries කියලා. හරි එතකොට we said highways. What else?
And this just a small thing to raise, sir, like aren't these like recurrent expenditure, local recurrent expenditure, aren't these financed by domestic borrowing?
Domestic borrowing also, yes. So ISBs විතරක් නෙමෙයි borrowing. We'll put that also. ISBs. Then we basically had local borrowing, LKR borrowing. Right? Right. Highways. Then what? Development purposes can the ports, Kulunas. What else?
Airport, which is not in use.
Airport. Not in use. What else?
These big conference halls and
Yeah. So that is all. Kudunas kilaman kiwekata. Right? Highways. Right. Now see. Loans is refinancing. Right? Recurrent, ideally, recurrent expenditure. Should we basically pay recurrent expenditure, settle recurring expenditure from borrowings or income?
Income, ideal situation.
definitely
Income.
from income.
Income. Right? Highways. Maybe. Right? Ports. Maybe. Airports. If you take the thing out, not in use ke kain karo, maybe. Right? So I'll give a little light green to those. This. And the conference halls. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So the columnar, I'll give a red, but it can be converted to a green also. So now the issue here, as you can see, is now this one. Maybe loans, okay, to some degree. So it's slightly a darker green. Highways. Again, I would say, let's see this one. Ports. What is the problem here? This is 7 years. What would give you revenue when?
First, we'll have to construct it, and then it has to develop gradually, and it will take a longer period to generate the revenue levels that we are expecting it to generate.
Yeah. So what could that be?
Probably say 10 to 15 years.
15 years. 15 to 20 actually.
Oh.
This one, what is the issue here? Local revenue. Do they make enough revenue for the $1 billion spent? Low revenue, low income. Airport. Same problem like ports, right? Yeah. Local expenditure.
So the question is like when a foreign country gives loans to us, someone like
Yes.
China is a we have those cities and all these investments are also issues for them also. But
Mhm.
why do they invest knowing that we are going to default? Because they would have done much more better evaluation comes to their foreign investments.
See, good question. They look at it not from a financial investment point of view. They look at these from a strategic investment point of view.
Geopolitical strategy.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, sir.
That's the reason. China, we borrowed from China and continued, we wouldn't have had a default situation because those buggers would have said, okay, fine, I'll roll over or something, as long as you are a slave of mine. The problem with ISBs is that's a commercial loan. right? Commercial lenders want their pound of flesh. So if you look at this, short-term borrowings for long-term revenue, the problem is cash flow mismatch, liquidity risk. So all these things started piling up at very short span, within a very short span into a single kind of tenor bucket, right? Like your credit card bill. So then we had to basically refinance it, roll over it. Now here, recurrent expenditure, borrowings is a big no. Because if you are borrowing, then you have to basically have a income generation avenue. This doesn't have an income generation avenue. Your government services need to basically cannot be serviced through borrowings, should not be serviced through borrowings, because the salaries per se, the government sector salaries per se will not generate any income as such. It's a service. So that service has to be given from our income, not from our borrowings. There's a huge mismatch. If you are borrowing something, you need to basically deploy it to generate a income. But paying government salaries is not generating any income. So therefore, you should not be using borrowings to finance that. See, these are the things that we continue to do. But these are the risks that we are facing as a result. So when somebody says that we will never get out of this bloody mess, these are the things that they look for. Right? So if we understand risk management, then we will understand what they are basically saying. Here again, ports. We, by putting a port itself, things will not fall into line. We need to basically develop the rest of the peripheral infrastructure. වටේට තියෙන අනික් industries දියුණු කරන්න ඕනේ මේ port taking වැඩක් ගන්න. Did we do that? Parallelly, we had to basically do all these things, because setting up free trade zones near the port or whatever. Now we are basically discussing about it after how many years of default. But we didn't have that proper planning, cash flow planning. Right? Highways. Yes, highways will start generating income again if we basically develop the peripheral industries to basically make the connectivity to the ports, the airports. We laid the structure, but didn't do the rest of the industries. We didn't have a plan for the rest of the industries. Right? Here also, say local revenue, currency mismatch. If we borrow in dollars, we need to have this high port would generate dollar income. But we had to have the peripheral industries, the free trade zones or whatever for this. Highways again. Highway revenue is not, that is just to maintain the highway. That's all about it. Not to repay the loan. But to repay the loan, we had to basically have dollar earning income. Maybe tourism was, serviced out of the highways because of connectivity and all that. So these are necessary things. But the problem is the currency mismatches, the tenor mismatches were not thought through. Highways again, we had to basically look at dollar generating avenues to repay the loan. No point in having rupee generating avenues to pay that loan. So there's a huge currency mismatch in our sources and users. In yeah. So this is a currency mismatch. Currency mismatch is a FX risk. Then tenor mismatch. Liquidity risk. Right? Then you had concentration risk. Which is again concentration and liquidity and all that. Short term nature. Actually, this was short term. Short term. If for capital expenditure purposes, 5 to 7 years is considered short term. Right? And also, part of this would have gone into consumption. Right? You get in a currency, all the tenor and FX risk and everything else. Consumption is short term. Right? Concentration, effects, all that. Now, I will ask you a question on this consumption thing. See, the question that I asked you previously also. We have enough cash flow in this country, right? Some people basically earn millions in rupees per month. So we have the spending power. So in this situation, if your Motor Trader Association says, okay, open up the car imports, is it advisable or not?
No,
Why?
because like there is no proper way of proper dollar inflows to the country. The tradable sector is still stagnant, and if they open up the vehicle imports, there will be huge dollar outflows from the country. So then there will be this BOP position rising again.
Very good. Yes. So what does that mean? Just because individually we are wealthy, as a country, we are not wealthy enough to have that foreign standard of living. Do you understand that? We say, I mean, not everything foreign is very high standard. We also have, certain standards are better in Sri Lanka than foreign, right? But general perception is that foreign goods are of good quality, foreign clothing is of good quality, shoes and all these consumables. Foreign food is more tastier than local food, which is a myth, and so on and so forth, right? So if we are to basically aspire to, get to those international standards of living, then we need to basically improve on our balance of payments. Just because we have money in rupees doesn't mean anything. But there is a perception that if you have rupees in billions, then we should be, what is the problem in enjoying those billions? Especially amongst business circles, that's the belief. So we need to basically, again, it is due to lack of risk management. It's convertibility risk. It's forex risk that we are talking about. Just because you have rupee income in billions, we have a huge risk in exposing ourselves to conversion because we have a huge currency mismatch at a country level. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So this is what you said. Opening will basically lead to balance of payment issues. But looking at it from a personal perspective, this is what we need to realize. Now, individually, we will not basically restrain from spending, right? If you have rupees enough cash, if goods are available, we will buy them, all right? So from a demand side, you can't control it. But how can you control it from? From a supply side. And supply side controls, we need to do it, carefully, but with proper information and knowledge sharing, we need to basically do that supply constraint. That's what is happening in the motor trade at the moment. But for how long, I don't know, because there is a huge amount of pressure being exerted, I believe, right? But there are others also. Then on top of that, we need to basically look at where the large chunks of foreign exchange is going to, right? Can we basically control them as well? Like food imports. Can we basically look at a manageable alternative to that, right? Do we need to be? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So then what do we need to basically do? So as policymakers, we are talking FX risk here, right? So from a FX risk point of view, what do we need to basically do? The policy changes that we need to do to ensure that FX outflow is stemmed, right? So then you have to basically look at things like I don't know where is the biggest spend gone, right? If you are basically trying to safeguard those dollars, if it is power generation, then we have to look at alternatives. It could be expensive, but there are models, right? Which will basically bring benefit in the long term. Then you have to look at transportation. Why are we not basically looking at the public transportation in a decent way? I mean, stopping cars from entering a city is not the answer. Give an alternative, which is as not maybe as good as, but as 80% good as private transportation in the public sector. People will move, right? But why aren't we looking at those? So those are the things which basically come as mitigating factors in your FX risk. So I'm basically converting this whole discussion into a risk management discussion, right? So those are the things. So I like you all to basically look at this discussion in that context, because there's a serious vacuum or lacuna in risk management knowledge in Sri Lanka. People don't basically look at it in that context. If you manage risk and basically you can live a better life, enjoy better quality at a country level, at personal level. But we don't do that because of lack of that appreciation for risk. Okay. So this entire discussion, I wanted to basically get you to at least start thinking in those terms. You all are master students. You need to start thinking in terms of your personal risk management as well as at a country level, the policies that are needed to basically be implemented, or as a collective body, we need to basically start supporting some of those things like solar, converting. I mean, people say a lot of things about it. Let's basically have a debate over it and, open debate and see what are the pros and what are the cons. See, these are the things. Aragale kila change karando ni meva. Not नील पाट मल्लीला, कोला पाट मल्लीला, रतु पाट मल्लीला change करने का नहीं. We need to basically change the approach. We need to basically change the discussion. Without that, we will not be able to, progress to the next level. That's why I want you all to basically answer me to my questions, not to basically test whether you all are talking to me or not. So, Chamari, Jani, I have no personal this thing, but when you talk only, you will start thinking. Because otherwise, you will not think about it. Okay. So I will not penalize if somebody says, I don't know. Right? That's not the intention. So Tamari, your name is deleted. You are also deleted here. But please, get into that discussion so that we basically have a collective understanding of what these things are. This discussion in particular, I wanted to have it a two-way conversation. Because this has a lot of local implications. Okay. So that's basically it on risk management. Now I think we are ready to go into another, which is balance of payments. Yeah. So we'll do that from next week onwards. Anything you want to basically have a clarification on? Any questions? No? All right, then. So then that's it for the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.